A brand new Lord of the Rings MMO, a huge update in the race between authors and AI, along with all of the blowback that came from it, some exciting news for Dungeons & Dragons fans. All this and more in today's video. What's shaking, what's shaking, what's shaking? My name's Cam and welcome back to another episode of it's not fantasy news. This isn't, obviously I'm not Daniel Green, and this isn't going to be like a recurring weekly thing, so I can only really use this gag once. But I haven't been able to record any videos for a couple of weeks, so I did want to make a video kind of covering some of the recent stuff that's happened within the fantasy book community, I guess you could say, or just fantasy community in general. Giving my opinions on it and kind of seeing how you guys feel about it, because some of this stuff is pretty big, some of it's pretty exciting, some of it's pretty worrying, but we'll get into that. Let's start off. Let's start with story 1, which is the new Lord of the Rings MMO. So you might remember that Amazon took a stab at the MMO market, taking on games like, World of Warcraft, Final Fantasy XIV, Guild Wars 2 with their own MMO, a little game you might have heard of called New World. You might also remember somewhat recently that Amazon took a stab at adapting some Lord of the Rings material with the critically acclaimed Rings of Power, which has been received with nothing but glowing praise. Well, here's a bit of juicy news for you. A couple of days ago, Amazon announced that they will be having another go at both the Lord of the Rings world and MMOs in general with a brand new Lord of the Rings MMO. Now, there is already a Lord of the Rings MMO, which is surprisingly popular. I think I tried it years ago and it felt very out of date for me. So for me personally, but apparently a lot of people play it. But anyway, Amazon's making their own new Lord of the Rings MMO, which is pretty exciting. We don't know a whole lot about it just yet, but from what we do know, it seems like the story of the MMO, or the time period, I guess you could say, is going to be set around the events of Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. I know that doesn't really make a lot of sense. They are kind of set far apart, somewhere within that time range, as opposed to, thousands of years earlier, like the events of the Silmarillion or Rings of Power. I would like to say that I'm cautiously optimistic for this game, but the thing is, I played New World when it came out, and it was okay. It was fine. It was one of those games where you could tell that they poured a lot of money into it. It looked nice, and it seemed like all of this potential was there, all of the ideas they had for the roadmap going forward. But I think, like a lot of other players, New World just lost my interest very, very quickly. There was just something very empty about it, something that just didn't feel there. It's entirely possible that you're a New World fan. You might play it right now. Hell, it might even be an entirely different game to when I first tried it, which was on release. Me and my mates, we picked it up pretty much the day it came out, intending to play it religiously. We were very excited about the idea of a brand new MMO finally, because all of the popular MMOs at that point had been out for 10 or more years. But like I said, I kind of lost interest within a week, which is relatively quick for a new game, especially an MMO. It just had this kind of empty feeling. And the thing is, among a lot of other issues, Rings of Power had the same issue. When approaching MMOs and Lord of the Rings adaptations in general, Amazon so far, for me personally, has not really managed to hit the mark. So I would like to say that I'm cautiously optimistic about a Middle-earth MMO, because that would be awesome. I'm loving the idea of being able to free roam through an open world of Middle-earth with up-to-date graphics, with the freedom to pretty much do whatever you want. That sounds great. However, as I'm sure we could all agree, there is a lot that could go wrong there, and I don't know, I guess I'm just skeptical when it comes to companies like Amazon taking on stuff that demands a certain level of passion and respect for the source material. Speaking of Amazon and their attempts at Tolkien material, we'll go into story 2. It's a very quick one. Basically just that Rings of Power Season 2 has begun, and so far, we don't have a whole lot just yet, but we do have this photo, which is of one of the orcs within the next season. Now, I wouldn't say I'm excited for Season 2, but I will watch it, and one thing I do want to say about this photo, and kind of just Season 1 in general, I know within the fantasy community you're at risk of being dragged into the street and whipped for saying anything good about Rings of Power, but I do want to say that with Season 1, a big thing that I actually did enjoy was a lot of the practical special effects. I think the orcs and most of the creatures within Season 1 actually looked really, really good. You know, that was one of the best parts about the Lord of the Rings trilogy and why it still holds up today, is because a lot of the monsters or creatures were practical effects, which ended up being one of the biggest flaws with the Hobbit trilogy because they opted more for just entirely CGI, which in my opinion looked pretty garbage. But then going back to the show, it looks like they're trying to lean back in the other direction and do more practical effects for some of the creatures and, you know, races. Orcs being one of them, and orcs, I think, in Rings of Power looked pretty good. I don't know. I am sorry for saying literally anything positive about that show. Let's go into Story 3, which is a big update in the AI taking on authors space. This is a really divisive one, although most of the people I've seen, I guess within my bubble, have been vehemently opposed to it. I'm kind of beating around the bush, but here's the news. Basically, this tweet went out from a company called Pseudo-Write, launching a AI engine called Story Engine, which is a tool supposedly for writers that can create long-form AI-generated stories rather than just the short ones that we've seen so far. The tweet claims to have worked with hundreds of novelists for months to build the ideal interface for writers and machines to collaborate on a narrative. Brand new AI engine supposedly capable of creating long stories out of simple prompts. That's what it is being pitched as. Naturally, within the reading and writing community, this wasn't received very well, with responses like these. You might remember in videos I've made in the past when talking about AI art, specifically like, you know, actual visual art, that I wasn't completely opposed to it as much as a lot of other people are, although I do agree that it is very obviously, you know, taking images from real life artists to create the art that it creates, because in some of them you can literally see the watermarks. I wasn't as opposed as a lot of other people because I felt, or I still kind of feel, that some of that AI generated art, which is very easy and very quick to make, is a great way of making concept art. A way, for example, for writers or authors to visualize some of the stuff in their head to help them either write their story, visualize plot lines and concepts and characters, or to show other people what they are thinking. In a concept space, I think AI art is incredibly useful, although when it comes to the commercial side, for example, making AI book covers and selling them, I not only think that's kind of sketchy, but I also think it's kind of dumb because AI art is not protected by copyright in the same way that human-created art is. You can slap a title and some other stuff over the top of it, but at the end of the day, that base image that you used is still available for anyone else to use however they see fit. So when it comes to AI writing long-form stories, how do I feel about that? I feel kind of miserable. Not because I feel like AI is competition for us, I guess, but more so just because I feel like the idea of a future where art, be that writing or images, are almost entirely created by data, by zeros and ones, is so bleak. One of the best things about, you know, reading a really good book or looking at a piece of digital or physically created illustrations is knowing how much passion and effort and work went into it. And when I look at AI generated stuff, it just feels like it might look good in terms of, you know, the art itself, but it just feels empty when you know that it wasn't created by anyone. I don't know. I just land in this very weird kind of ballpark where I respect the fact that we as a species have created something so advanced. It's incredibly impressive. And I do think that AI and its tools are going to drastically shoot us forward in terms of what we can achieve. But I also am very skeptical and maybe even a little bit concerned about how it's going to be used in the smaller kind of situations and fields like creating art. Is AI at a point right now where it can rival actual book authors? No, absolutely not. But this AI stuff, whether we like it or not, it's just not going to go away. It's one of those things where it's out there. Anyone can kind of do it if they have the knowledge. it's there. It's going to happen, and it's going to keep getting more advanced. I really do think at a certain point, AI will be able to generate entire stories that are almost indistinguishable from human-written stories. Although they might not be good, they could still end up being awful, but it could still look like someone wrote it. I would not consider someone who types some prompts into a computer program to create a book a writer. And I think I would lose a lot of respect for anyone who did that and claimed to be a writer. I think if this ever gets to the point where, I'm pretty sure it will, someone creates an AI written book and then uses their connections to make it a #1 bestseller and then goes around calling themselves #1 best-selling author of this book that a computer wrote, I'm gonna slam my head in a car door. I don't know. What do you think? So going into Story 3 for Dungeons & Dragons fans, which by the way, minor segue, I've wanted to be a Dungeons & Dragons player for so long now. It's a game I've always just kind of been watching from the window on the outside, and always being like, oh, I want to play that, but none of my friends ever want to be Dungeon Master, and finding a Dungeon Master is a whole other thing. I'm getting carried away. The point is that it's a game I've always desperately wanted to play, and just recently I've actually been able to start playing Dungeons & Dragons, and it is not just as fun as I always hoped it would be, it's more fun. I love it. Anyway, one of the reasons I've been a D&D fan for so long before I even got to play it is watching Critical Role. If you aren't aware of them, basically they are a group of voice actors, and when they started, they were literally just in one of their apartments playing Dungeons & Dragons together, filming themselves with a crappy little camera. Fast forward to now, where they are an absolute staple within the D&D community, and they've built kind of an empire for themselves as Dungeons & Dragons figureheads. Anyway, that's not the news. Critical Role is still within their campaign 3 at the moment, which is a weekly kind of series within this story they're telling, following, the adventures of this group within their D&D world. However, they have just recently announced something brand new, which is kind of a big deal for the D&D community. It's called Candela Obscura, which is going to be kind of a horror themed D&D game that they will be doing monthly, so only one episode every month. Like I said, it's going to be a horror, and it's about this kind of group of investigators looking into a murder sort of thing. It's like a murder mystery, I guess. I don't know, that's what I'm gathering from it. However, the reason that this is such a big deal is because they are going to be moving away, for this story, they're going to be moving away from the classic Dungeons & Dragons kind of 20-sided dice formula, which is the most popular and commonly used way of playing games like this, for a brand new game system of their own design, which I believe is going to be a D6 or 6-sided dice centered system. A lot of people who follow tabletop or Critical Role in general are very, very interested, myself included, to see how this new game system works, and maybe even try it for ourselves if it looks fun, if it looks interesting. Although the idea of moving away from, the classic D20 kind of stuff does feel a little bit uncomfortable, but whatever. I don't know, it's just very exciting to hear that there's going to be kind of a new game system introduced by some of the most prolific players within the D&D community. Which, on the topic of Dungeons & Dragons, might be interesting even to people who don't play D&D, is the D&D movie, which came out a little while ago now, I guess. I saw it with a couple of my mates when it came out in the theaters, expecting just kind of like a goofy, you watch it and you're like, eh, kind of movie. And was extremely surprised to find that movie actually slaps, really hard. That is a really good movie. Even if you don't play D&D, I think that is going to be a really fun movie just for, fans of fantasy in general. If you're looking for kind of a lighthearted, fun, almost classic adventure style of story, it's great. Not only was it funny with a lot of fun Easter eggs in there for D&D fans, but it also had some really, really hype action sequences. I don't know, just all around a pretty good movie. I hope they make a sequel. Speaking of surprisingly good movies, I also want to just mention really quickly Guardians of the Galaxy 3. I'm sure you know about it. I'm not going to give any spoilers, so don't worry if you haven't seen it. But it's all over TikTok. Everyone's playing that Florence and the Machine song from the movie. I know it's a cliche to say at this point, but I'm just genuinely over superhero movies. I just am, and that's coming from someone who collected the Flash comics since I was a little kid. I just genuinely don't care anymore, but Guardians of the Galaxy was one of the last, actually, now I think about it, might be the last like Marvel movie I was actually interested in watching. I really wasn't expecting a whole lot, but again, like D&D, except even more so in this case, I was blown away. It is a genuinely good movie. My only criticism would be that, kind of like Thor Love and Thunder, although nowhere near as bad as that movie, a lot of the more serious moments are kind of undercut by a like subpar joke. It just kind of seems like with a lot of these Marvel movies, they're too scared to take themselves too seriously. Like if a moment's getting too emotional or too serious, they have to throw a joke in there. They're like, oh wait, this is a kid's movie. Bam, throw a joke in there. And I don't know, I'm not a big fan of that. But all of that aside, it is a funny movie. It is a very sincere and heartfelt kind of send-off from not just the Guardians of the Galaxy as we know them, but also from the director of the movie and the cast and the crew. You can just kind of tell this is their goodbye to each other, and it's really sweet. It also features one of the best, like, most exciting action sequences I've ever seen in a Marvel movie. It seems like any time a fight takes place in a hallway, it's just a recipe for success. We all knew the backstory of Rocket Raccoon was going to be tragic, but I severely underestimated just how sad it would make me feel. Anyway, there has been your not fantasy news. I am not your disheveled goblin host, I'm Cam. While I'm not the host of fantasy news, I do make a lot of videos about fantasy books and stories in general. I make discussions, reviews, all that kind of stuff. So if you're a fantasy reader like myself, then I would love it if you stuck around. I'd love to have you here. Let me know what you think about any of the stuff I've talked about today in the comments below. I'll be back with another video real soon. Thank you so much for watching, especially for watching through to the end of the video. You are my favorite. Hopefully I'll see you in the next video, but even if I don't, have a good one. Look after yourself, Daniel. I'm sorry for ripping off your shtick, and catch ya.